Welcome to Emotionships, where we talk about the real reason everything happens for a reason. I am your host, Charlie Carroll, along with my cantankerous co-host, Mallory Redmond.
Yes.
Who's sitting across from me making a face like her daughter, Evie.
I am?
Welcome to the program, Mal.
I don't even know anymore.
I guess Evie makes faces like you, but I just saw Evie over there.
Yes. If only. Someday she will take my chair.
Well, that's the hope, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know what I can't stop thinking about?
Ooh, I don't.
Hopefully here soon I'll get to take a trip to Las Vegas, which was making me think about blackjack, which made me think about your in episode 21, your comment about Matt Delmonico.
Oh, you weren't supposed to say his last name.
Oh.
I mean, there's not a rule against that. I just was trying to keep him more anonymous.
Oops. But the reason why I can't stop thinking about it is because of the emotion ship. We just 21, yes. The number.
Episode 21.
We just said a number in episode 21. If you haven't watched it, make sure you get back and watch it.
Yeah.
We said the number 21 and his name popped up in your head. It's an emotion ship.
Yes. Yeah. Right when you said episode 21, I thought, oh, Matt Delmonico. That's like such formative years.
Yeah. Well,
and he loved the number 21. It was his basketball number.
Yeah.
And so I started loving the number 21 because I loved him, or whatever 16-year-old Mallory felt. And I still think about number 21 and connect it to him.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong about that. With that. One of the things that I appreciate about you is your willingness to be vulnerable and to share those things, because people could misinterpret that. But what you're not doing is denying like your history and your past and your feelings, yes. Which I think is very healthy.
Thanks. What I appreciate about you is that you look
Whoa. Time out. You can't do a return appreciation.
Yes, I can.
You just have to receive the appreciation that you received without giving one back.
Thank you so much. And thanks for looking out for me and saying that. There, I got my appreciation.
Perfect.
Should we just call it a day? That was a good enough episode, right?
It's important for people to understand, like practically speaking, what an emotion ship looks and feels like.
Yes.
That these are the things that are actually driving our life, are these associations and things that are behind the scenes. And so we're just huge advocates for awareness. And I've seen in my own life the power of being aware of the emotion ships that are there.
Mm-hmm. So just to go a little bit deeper into it, because sometimes we don't even talk about emotion ships. Right. I mean, we talk about them without talking about them.
Right.
So like the number 21
sure.
And my high school boyfriend. So you're aware, I'm aware that the number 21 is in my mind connected to him. And then what? Like there's just that awareness, or do I go deeper into how that makes me feel?
Well, the answer is yes. You could do multiple things. I think the awareness piece there is, if you're not careful, you could start entertaining those feelings. And because it was a especially exciting time of your life, like 16 is a very exciting phase of life. I was just telling someone a couple of weeks ago, with my son getting his permit, his driver's, his temps, I can remember that when I got my license, like that was the end for me being at my house and being with my parents. I was always out and always gone. And so, looking back on your own life to that time of freedom and excitement, there is going to be energy that you feel. Like there are literal hormones and concoctions in your muscles and in your body that are associated with that time in your life. And so, you hear this number 21 and it reminds you of that overall exciting phase of your life. And this Matt guy, who is a human being, which means he had his own problems and selfishness and all of that stuff. But if you're not aware of the overall things that were happening in that phase of your life, you could start wondering like, well, did I marry the right person? Like, should I be with Darren? Or, oh
it
man,
would be a disaster if I married Matt Delmonico. What a disaster.
Matt, if you're listening, that was the
great
old
guy,
you.
But what a disaster that would be. But yes, I hear you, and it makes me think about in episode 21 the basement that we were talking about, because initially I do have like warm, fuzzy feelings about that time of my life.
Yeah.
And then I start thinking about it a little bit more and I'm like, oh, I don't want to go back there. I do not. That was hard.
Yeah.
It was really hard.
And good for you that you're in a place from a health standpoint that you can realize that not everyone is there. You know, going back to that poll of 50% of Americans are unhappy right now. You know, what we don't understand, and this is kind of getting into the anatomy of seduction. What we don't understand is that we have to always be curious. We have to wonder if there could be more in order to move forward. Like the nature of appetites, you know, and I'm not talking just about food, but like for romance and for love, the nature of appetites is that you can fill them up and then they naturally go back down in order for you to fill them back up again.
Right.
And if you don't understand that and you get caught up in the pursuit of always having that full, you'll never be happy. And so when you get into this, you know, I have an ABC equation. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, when you look at episode 21 and talking about the deeper the basement, the higher the ceiling, you know, I've been around adultery and affairs my whole life. And so I've come to understand them and see them from a different perspective. You know, it happened in my immediate family. It happened with my grandparents. It happened in my wife's family. I've counseled, you know, a couple hundred couples through it. I've recently worked through 2 couples, you know, trying to help them get through it. And, you know, often what we analyze or look at when it comes to affairs and adultery is very much like an emotion ship where we make it this very super spiritual thing. And one person is just bad. They're all bad. And that's why they made the decision. And it's the furthest thing in the world from that there is so much going on underneath the surface that we throw completely out the door. And we just want to make those people unbearable, unthinkable people that we just need to write off and get out of our life because they're going to hurt us again. Yeah. And nowhere has it been as hopeless, typically speaking, than in the church. That the church tends to throw a whole person's life away because of this situation that happened between 2 human beings that have appetites and desires for happiness and romance and love, and we don't get into the emotionship behind all of these things, and we just throw lives away. Yeah. The large majority of the people that I have worked with that have never recovered from adultery or from an affair died from shame and guilt, not lust or infatuation. Right. And so, you know, when I talk about the ABCs, I think what we don't understand, you know, Proverbs says that the eyes are never satisfied. And that has a lot to do with the way that we're made, that because we have eternity in our heart, nothing here on earth will ultimately ever satisfy us in the way that we don't have to hunt or that we won't be hungry again. And so part of like understanding your humanity is that you got to understand that you're always going to be curious and you're always going to want more and you're always going to have an appetite. But getting more and pursuing more doesn't always lead to more. And so when I say that the ABCs of adultery or the anatomy of seduction, what I'm talking about, and thankfully, you know, I'm 3rd generation with the men above me not understanding this, and because they were charismatic leaders and led people and experienced stress and the weight of responsibility, which is something we can get into and talk about here in a minute. You know, this is something that happened to them, and they didn't have someone that was knowledgeable enough to help them process it, handle it, make it right, and move on in a way, here's the important part, that they didn't have to do it again. And so the ABCs is this equation of understanding that if you are with A right now, person A, and you leave them for B, what 99.9% of humanity doesn't think about is the things that were inside of you that you did not understand that caused you to leave A to go to B, and how they're not the same equation is not going to get you to leave B to go to C, right? And so I see all the time men and women that leave their spouse and leave their families and everything you could ever think about, not understanding that appetite's never going to leave. For more, that desire for more is never going to leave. But what caused you to leave A for B is not going away. What caused you to leave A for B will cause you to leave B for C. And every time you go a letter from A to B, B to C, C to D, it becomes more difficult, more dysfunctional, and less likely that you will stay with that person. And that's why we see, a lot of people sitting by themselves in their mid 60s and 70s because they allowed something that they did not understand to cause them, kind of similar to what we said in the last episode about hitting a wall of resistance and changing directions. They allowed not understanding this deep hunger inside of them to cause them to leave and go a different direction versus staying.
Is it whatever the filling is that they're looking for, like the filling of their appetite? Is that, how do you come to find what that is?
How do you come to discover what it is that makes
that you continue to go after, right?
Well,
what it is that your appetite is wanting.
Everybody has the desire for intimacy, and the idea of intimacy is to know and be known. Some other foundational concepts to adultery and affairs is that we don't understand that people are always growing and changing. Every 7 years, your body completely reproduces itself. It has all new cells, all new bones, everything is new. We need to translate that over to the emotional and spiritual side of people, that people are always growing and becoming new, and therefore they are always going to be a new person, slowly, bit by bit, piece of the mosaic by piece, are going to become someone new. And so, typically in the first session, when I sit down with someone, I'll say like, okay, tell me the problem, right? Tell me what's going on. Or maybe this is after an affair has happened and we're trying to reconcile. What do you think led to the problem? And the large majority of the people give me the same answer, and that is, well, we don't love each other anymore, or we fell out of love. And that statement is often rooted in the idea that this person is the same person I married 5 years ago or 15 years ago or 25 years ago, and I just don't love them the way I used to. And to which my response is, you've got to understand the difference between feelings and affection and love. Love is a choice. Feelings are feelings. Affection is a feeling. You don't feel the same way you felt about them, but that's because you hit a wall, and instead of acknowledging that they've become a new person, or maybe they're stuck in their journey to become a new person, you just wrote it off and said they'll be this way the rest of their life. This person is a lot easier to know and be known by, right? The idea of intimacy. I can be intimate with them a lot easier because I don't know them. And so you went that direction. But at some point in time, as we dig and want to go deeper in life, we're always going to run into that clay, that hard soil, coming from South Carolina. Like, I know what it's like to have this soil that's like clay that's impossible to dig in. Or those rocks, the limestone, in any relationship, and it might be a rock in your life, an immaturity in your life, or it could be a rock in their life where they're hard to love, or they're hard to understand, or they're difficult to communicate with. And just because you experience resistance with them or in yourself as you guys are growing together and becoming new, doesn't mean you should pull the plug and jump ship.
Sure.
But the easy thing to do is just that, to say that, I have these needs. I want to feel loved. I want to know someone. I want those feelings of excitement again. And so therefore I'm leaving A to get to B. But then a certain amount, and this is 70% of the time, I think it's 74% or 76% of the time, when you leave A to get to B, 76 or 74%, let's call it 75% of the time, you're leaving B to get to C. And when you get to C, it's double than that. It's 150% of the time you're going to leave C to get to D. And what do you end up doing? Never being happy and dying alone. Nobody coming to your hospital room.
Yeah. Do you think that the A, B, C, D, blah 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 that you are going to, is it always another person? Like, are you talking about literal affairs right now?
Yeah, I'm talking about literal affairs.
Okay.
I mean, but obviously this could be applied with jobs as well.
Well, I just think there are some people that maybe would be tempted to tune out just because it's like, well, I would not leave my husband or my wife, or I would not have sex with somebody that's not my husband or wife. When it's,
which is absurd for anybody to say that. Because often I hear people say that, and I do think it's possible not to do that, and it's definitely the healthy and the right thing not to do that. But I've often heard young people, and I've warned children that are flipping out and refuse to speak to their parent because they had an affair. I often counsel them that they need to be wise about this because they never know where they will end up later in life. And when you harbor feelings of judgment, anger, and bitterness towards someone for something, you build a bridge from their action and what they did to get that into your own life. That's a passage in the book of Hebrews that says, pursue peace with all people, lest bitterness, a root of bitterness, spring forth and defile you. And so I have seen that, multiple generations of adultery and affairs gets passed down because we didn't have the ability to process why dad, who was supposed to love me, or why mom, who was supposed to love and care for me, did what they did.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Danny Meyer, the restaurateur and hospitality guru. Mm-hmm. Are you wondering where I'm going with this?
A little bit.
In his book, Setting the Table, he talks about the first time he found two of his restaurants that were working for him in a restaurant.
Two of his employees.
Two of his employees that were working for him in a restaurant. He found them making out, and both of these people were married to other people. Mm-hmm. He found them making out in a freezer, right? Because he couldn't find them anywhere. Mm-hmm. And not knowing what to do or how to handle it, he went to his father and said, like, hey, here's the situation. Like, what do you do? And I absolutely love his father's answer. It was so practical. He said, listen, when people are in the trenches together, day after day, they're going to love each other, grow to love each other, or hate each other. Mm. And so the practical dynamic is just like, you're a human being. People are human beings, and there are characteristics, lovable, desirable characteristics in everyone that you want to know more of. And so often, if you're not taking care of your relationship and growing deep in the relationship that you're in, it's always going to be easier to gravitate toward the superficial stuff that you're less familiar with in the person beside you than the person you've been building a relationship with for 10 years.
Totally. So how do you continue to grow, like, as your own individual person while simultaneously growing in your relationship, like continuing to pursue one another? Because what do you do if your spouse doesn't really want to keep growing with you?
Yeah. So at any point in time when you, and this is why premarital counseling is so important, right? Like, let's stay with the topic of literal adultery for a second. Mm-hmm. This is why premarital counseling is so important, because the right person will help you understand that you're entering into a circle, and you just need to have an idea from a self-care and from a maturity standpoint, a relational maturity standpoint, where they are in that circle, so that you don't get caught off guard by their immaturities or their expectations. And so often you find people that quote unquote fall in love and start this journey together, and they say that they want to get married, but they don't acknowledge where the other person is when it comes to relational maturity, and A, pursuing their own self-care and growth, but B, pursuing self-care and growth for the relationship where two people have now become one, and what one person does dramatically affects the other person.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so important. There was a situation a couple of years ago where someone came to me for a counseling situation, and you could tell that they knew their relationship and the person they were married to was concerning to them, that the other person, their spouse, had some immaturities that bothered them, and they were trying to figure out how to bring it to them or how to communicate that to them. And what's funny is the husband that saw the wife come and try to get help and ask questions to a pastor, right, to myself that was serving in the role as pastor, got so insecure about it and worried that he started lying to her, telling her that he had had multiple conversations with people that said, you can't trust me, that you shouldn't go to him and talk to him, you can't trust him, because he was worried about what would it look like if she became more aware and more whole and pursued growth and more maturity, but I'm not ready to go there, or that's scary to me.
Sure.
And so his approach was to submarine her attempts to grow and get healthy herself. What's the point? The point is you've got to know, if you're going to marry someone, you just have to be aware of what you're getting into and what their commitment is to self-care and to the pursuit of growth.
That's so hard when we're new every 7 years.
Well, it is, but there are things that you can talk about, like, what are your expectations? You can get a sense of, by the way they treat others, not you, by the way they treat others, their level of relational maturity.
True.
You know, if they want to sit around and play video games and they have no interest in being a part of other people's lives, that tells me they're probably not going to be that great when it comes to going deep with you.
Yeah.
Maybe so, but like there's this, and that's why I say you enter a circle, because life is holistic and you can learn a lot by watching how they treat other people and what they're passionate about and what turns the lights on for them as to what it's going to mean for you eventually.
There's so much to be said about continuing to pursue your spouse and be pursued. And I think about it in, right now, Darren and I are in the trenches of parenting. Like it is game on. It is full on. But that's not the only example of like when marriage is super hard. You think about like my parents or our parents who now have like empty nest,
Sure,
right? And
yeah.
like that's a whole nother set of it's just emotionally wearing on. It's a whole new phase of life. And so does the pursuit change based on phase of life? And is it like the questions that you're asking one another? Like what can you say more about the pursuit in order to continue to fill our appetites healthily?
Yeah. The first thing that I want to say is you bring up a good point when it comes to empty nesters. It is alarming how many people are getting divorced after their children get out of the house. And that's because we unintentionally have worshiped our children. I feel really bad for the parents who worship their children, because once those children are gone and you can no longer worship them because they're living their own life, you're going to have an even more difficult time with your spouse, because there is now no reason or no excuse for you to be preoccupied with pursuing something other than your spouse. And so I've seen a lot of divorces. I've seen a lot of depressed people who, once their kids are out of the house, they have trouble because they made their kids the center of their universe, which all psychology and research on the matter says it's completely unhealthy for you to pursue and make your children the center of your universe. It is a scary thing to become a helicopter parent and make your purpose protecting your little child and making sure nothing bad happens to them. Now, I don't purposely put my children in environments where they can get hurt, but I do give them as much freedom as I can to learn and make mistakes while under my roof, so I can help them process through it. And God forbid something happened to me and my wife, or me or my wife. Like, I want them to be able to live and navigate life versus have the filters cranked down so tight that nothing gets in. And when it comes to adversity and responding to difficulties, they are these little virgins that get crushed because mom and dad were so great at protecting their parents or protecting their children.
I was listening to a podcast the other day, Brene Brown's podcast, and they were talking about how all of parenthood is or should be cultivating independence.
Sure.
Like from the time that they come out of the womb, like you're teaching them how to sleep by themselves and eat by themselves. Like you are just cultivating independence in them from the very beginning.
Oh man, we're freaking out, our control freaks.
But that's so much of what I see, right? With 60 plus, either there's divorce, there's an affair, or it's just a dead marriage.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's just, it's like strangers living together. They're just roommates.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really sad.
It's an unfortunate reality that comes out of the difficulty that is there when it comes to managing and stewarding a living, breathing relationship. You're becoming new. They are becoming new, which means everything is always in motion, right? Which means we have to be much more aware, much more engaged, and actively guard against becoming tuned out, right? And not letting our feelings or our natural appetites and curiosity convince us to take the easy route and to move on to something that is easy to cultivate or harvest, but it starts our journey over. And so every time you take something just because it's close to the surface or it's not hard to dig 3 inches deep, you reset your journey when it comes to going deep with what is supposed to satisfy you later in life. I read, months ago where it was someone saying that it used to be that a woman was not even worth looking at until she was 40. And the idea behind it, the piece was communicating like we understood culturally, like as a woman gets older and more mature and seasoned and lives life, like that's where it's at. It's not in these superficial teenage glamorous looks where a woman exists or where her value is. Mm-hmm. It's in her growing into become this mature woman that has been through life and knows how to love someone in return. Yeah. But that's not the way our culture works. Our culture is like superficial. If they look good, if their skin is tight, all of these different things. And it's like, that's a whole nother story about how we have turned the human body into a product to be consumed. And everywhere we go, billboards and social media ads, it's like, you're not going to be happy or satisfied unless you're consuming this. Mm-hmm. And it just doesn't work that way.
So let's say that there is a couple who there has been an affair and, or maybe it's just a couple that has not been pursuing one another and they're deciding like, we need to get back in the game.
Sure.
What does that look like for an affair? To make it simple, let's say they had an affair.
Sure.
And they choose to stay together. So what does it look like then to kind of kind of make that return?
Yeah.
Over, immediately, what does it look like? What have you seen over time that it looks like for them?
Yeah. Hundreds of situations and processing through this in, close to home in my own family being raised. And then, like I said, in my wife's family, mm-hmm. I'll use basketball as an analogy, or any other sport for that matter. There are manifestations or consequences, and there are disciplines or actions. And so when someone comes to see me because they've had an affair or there's trouble in the relationship, every single time they want to sit down in my office and tell me what's wrong. And I very quickly, I let them tell me long enough to incriminate them. And then I stopped them and I said, okay, tell me what is right. Write down, and I'll give them each a piece of paper. Write down 2 to 3 disciplines you guys have practiced over the last month, over the last year, and if applicable, over the last decade, where you put these things into practice and you said, come hell or high water, these are the things that we are going to do to grow our relationship. Mm. Do you know I have never had one couple give me that piece of paper back and said, we went on a date every week as one of their things. Or we spent time every night talking and going deep and hearing one another's heart. We made sure that we communicated through our frustrations and through our temptations. Never. And so often, answering the question as to what do you do if that's you or you're in this situation, don't allow yourself to be distracted by what's wrong. If you don't tend to something, if you're not shooting free throws, then you can expect to go 2 or 3 for 10. Why in the heck are you surprised when you're going 20 to 30% from the free throw line when you never practice? You never invest in your game. But see, that's the nature of how relationships work. They're not working, but when I ask, what are you doing to invest in your relationship and make it healthy? Nobody can answer that. Right. The answer is nothing. And that's why, I say in my premarital counseling, I do, right, at the altar, I do, doesn't mean I don't have to pursue you anymore. Mm-hmm. But somehow, culturally, we've gotten to this place where we think because they're mine now, they said I do, I don't have to pursue them anymore.
Right.
The opposite is true. The race has just begun. Same thing with your relationship with God. When you say I do and you make Jesus, the Lord and Savior of your life, that's the beginning of the race, folks. That's not the end. And so that's what I love about the truth and the holistic nature of God's word, that there's this mirror that plays out in real life. When starting in the 30s, really 1915, with the revival movement amongst tent preachers and Charles Finney, when the narrative between God and man became more about a proclamation, about a decision we confess with our lips. Like, I don't want to go to hell. I want Jesus to be my Lord and Savior. And that was the goal line. That became the touchdown. We see it reflected in our relationships. Right. And people say, I do, which translates into, I don't have to pursue you anymore. Mm-hmm. But for a relationship, any relationship, whether it's between God and us or you and your spouse, relationships work when people keep pursuing one another because they understand that this person is always growing and always changing.
Yeah.
I compare it to a fire or a garden. You got to touch that regularly. You've got to stoke the fire and be in the garden on a daily basis. Now, you can get in the garden once a week, but it's a lot harder. Mm-hmm. Walking through there, finding the weeds, pruning different things. Like, it's much easier to keep it going in the right direction if you will just walk through it and spend a little bit of time each and every day. Same thing with a fire. You can't, contrary to modern day and turning on your gas oven or your microwave, that's not the way a fire works. You can step away from it for a little bit, 15, 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes at most. But you got to come back and touch it and invest in it and move things around and look closely at it if you want it, if you want it to keep burning. Yeah. Same thing with a garden. Like, you got to put the time in if you want great fruit.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned a little bit earlier about people in leadership. Can you say more about that? I feel like there has been, over the past couple of years, and maybe it's just the increase in the technology that we're just hearing more stories, but it feels to me like there are more and more people in leadership, especially in Christian leadership, that affairs are being discovered that they're having.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of the practical things that we've already said, but like responsibility and your will, we can start with this. A person's willpower is a muscle, right? And so one of the strategies is, people get attacked and are vulnerable to making poor decisions when they're tired. Mm-hmm. And so people, a couple of really big pastors, across the country that were pastoring mega churches, and this is not uncommon. This has happened since I was a kid, and it won't go away. That the more responsibility and weight you have on your shoulders, the more tired you become. And there's 1,000 different studies out there, probably 10,000, where when a chocolate chip cookie is put in front of someone who is on a diet that says they should not have that, based on what happened in that day or what point in the day that gets put in front of them, they are more likely to give into the temptation to satisfy themselves. And so you've got the willpower issue there that, I wish we would quit crucifying our leaders and demonizing them because they ran to the fire, took on too much responsibility, and ended up getting burnt. And then we look at them and almost laugh at them and act as if they got burnt on purpose. I mean, it is the damnedest thing that we throw our leaders under the bus when all of them run to the fire, whether they're ignorant, immature, or not. They run to the fire because they have a genuine concern to help people. And then they end up getting in over their head or not taking care of themselves, make this decision. And now all of a sudden, everything they said for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years doesn't mean anything and needs to be erased. And we need to get them offline because, man, they just did this on purpose. You know who advocates that stuff? In my opinion, from my experience, the people that didn't have the courage to run to the fire themselves. They love justifying why sitting on their butt was right, and that person ran to the fire and must have had bad intentions and got burnt. Yeah. Boy, did they deserve it. Is the mindset that often comes. And it's like, whether you like it or not, when God chooses for someone to lead, looking at King David as an example, God knew it was going to happen before it happened, and he still chose them. Mm-hmm. And so whereas we become moralists, especially in the church, and tend to evaluate God's ability to use someone by their ability not to make mistakes, God's not that way. God knew all that David was going to do before he did it, and yet he still allowed him to kill Goliath and get started. And he ends describing David as a man after his own heart.
So what does that level of protection, if you are running to the fires, if you are in a leadership position, you're in a helping profession, how do you protect yourself? And I would love to hear how you personally protect yourself. Yeah. You're celebrating 20 years with Amy this summer, which is amazing. And so you are obviously a person that has a lot of responsibility.
Sure.
And you, this is generationally, there are affairs that you have grown up around and that have impacted you personally. So what does that look like for?
Well, one of the things that a mentor/coach who was in ministry for a long time said to me several years ago is don't outrun your supplies. Don't outrun your supply chain. And for the people that do run to the fire and the people that are not afraid to go deeper into the fire to try to help more people, it is very easy to outrun your supply chain, meaning the people that God has placed around you to go deep with. And so I think one of the things that is important from a seasoned leader is to understand that just because you can or just because you want to go deeper and further and pull that one person out, it's important to be going deep with people and have the relationships around you where you don't leave the herd or leave the pack, where you don't leave the herd or the pack. And you and I were talking about this yesterday for other reasons when it comes to our large community here, that we've got to get better at identifying naturally or accidentally those that are on the outside of the herd, because those are the one, when you watch National Geographic or Animal Channel, and it's going to be that daggone episode where the little deer gets chased by, a pack of hyenas or a lion.
Sure.
It's the one that dropped their head for a little bit to eat grass, which is a completely normal, necessary thing, that look up and now they're, a couple 100 yards away from the rest of the pack. And so I think that, if we're not going to be pushed over, we can be pulled. And an important part of that is understanding that I play a role with my self-care and the pace of life, that bigger is not always better. More is not always more. That you've got to slow down and understand that, and I'm not calling myself a Ferrari, but Ferraris take a lot more self-care than, the VW Bug does. Maybe. I know Volkswagen has had some problems here. But
I understand what you're saying.
You know what I mean? Like the Honda Accord does not have the maintenance schedule, and the tires don't cost $1,000 a piece. Now, they can't perform. That Honda Accord can't perform like a Ferrari. But the more gifted you are and the more passionate you are and the faster you're going, you need better self-care, and it's more expensive. And there's a lot more there's a lot more threats or risks to being a Ferrari, because you never know who wants to be around you just because other people talk about how shiny they think you are, not how shiny you are or how powerful you are, how people think you are. And so when you are a charismatic leader and you wake up and find that your reputation is so much bigger than you, meaning like it's just wider and deeper than you, and you don't even know who makes this stuff up. Often it's people somewhat close to you, but distant enough that they're trying to leverage how other people see you for their own benefit. Like you wake up and you don't know, in some cases, who's around you or wanting to be around you because of what they perceive you to be versus who you actually are. And so if you're not careful and you get caught up in that, you'll get lured out to a place where damage can happen, or you're out at a time of night, using the car analogy, where you can't see as well, and you're going to get hurt. I love the lyric in a John Mayer song that says, "Do you love me or the thought of me?" And anybody that's in leadership struggles with the reality once they get to a point where they can understand it, where most people are in love with the thought of me. They're not in love with me. They're in love with the thought of me and who I am and what I can do for them or what I mean to them, not who I actually am. And so if you're not careful, you'll start living into this false persona and allow that to pull you off of your center. I was telling a business person last week that I had not seen in a while. We were talking about just the importance of self-care and you driving that bus in your life. And I was telling a story of a good friend of my father's who had a mirror in his room that would say to himself every day, he'd look in that mirror and say, "Now don't believe your own BS today." He had to remind himself of that as a pioneer and somebody that wants to change a lot of lives, you can get caught up in your own narrative. And the danger in that is that narrative can pull you off center, make you more tired or running a schedule and doing things that is unhealthy and wears your willpower out. And then just somebody that is nice, that you're compatible with, that you're more like than your spouse is, becomes a temptation, and thoughts and feelings start to develop. And next thing you know, you slowly make these decisions between two good people that wanted to make a great difference. And a lot of what you worked for is lost because people feel like they can't trust people that lived one life while doing another. And I don't think it's fair, but it is the nature. It's the nature of the game when you're in leadership.
Yeah. How do you assess your level of hunger and how your appetite and how it's being tended to? Sometimes when you think you're hungry and really you just need a glass of water.
Sure.
So I'm curious how what somebody could do, because that's what you're saying, right? Like you have an appetite, which is fine and good and healthy and normal. But you're A is not really filling it for you anymore.
Sure.
So you go to B. And so how do you assess how that is all going for you?
Yeah. What I have found is that there is a natural rhythm to grace that if you will just flow with it, like floating on a river, it will get you to where you need to go when you need to get there. That seldom or very rarely do you need to pick up an oar and get there faster. And I think of, the story of Moses, whose mother, Jochebed, put him in a basket, and he naturally gravitated toward the most wealthy, influential, powerful person's daughter in the whole world, just by being carried on the river. And so, one of the things that I believe in reading scripture is that God's favor hunts us down, that we don't have to turn over every single stone, but that it will happen for us. And so, a couple of episodes, I made the statement, here on the podcast a couple of episodes ago, that if you're not being overwhelmed by empathy and gratitude, you're not doing it right. And a lot of that came out of, one of my strengths is dreaming. One of my strengths is chasing. Like, I can work 6 months, not take a day off, and I'm pretty good, right? Because I just like to go. That being said, I have to find ways to rest and to force myself to rest. And one of the things that I really watch is my attitude toward life and toward others. And so I know I'm getting a little pulled off center if empathy and gratitude are not overwhelming me each and every day. If worry or anger or stress is dominating my feelings more than empathy and gratitude, that's one way that I've discovered, like, I've kind of allowed this whole narrative and this big story, and it can be an accurate, real story. All of these great things that are happening has kind of pulled me off of center, which the problem with that is that it's being who you are with the desires that you have and being grounded and centered that got you here in the first place. And so that's why you need to work hard to stay there and believe that life is happening for you versus to you.
Yeah. Whew. Well, that's good and practical. Like, that's a helpful way to.
Well, and I think a lot of this, as painful as these situations are, I think it's about practical. Like, when we came up with the statement, the real reason everything happens for a reason, it was identifying that a lot of people blame things on God. Like, well, if it was supposed to happen, it's going to happen. Or if it's supposed to happen, it's going to happen. Or everything happens for a reason, which is another way to say, well, God kind of allowed this. Specifically in this situation with adultery and affairs, it is so much more practical than that. It is in the roots. Like, the energy is just very foundational, that we all have these desires to know and be known. And it's much harder to go deeper over time than it is just to take something off the surface.
Okay, so before we wrap up, can you offer some, like, again, really practical pieces of just like actions that a couple can do?
Yeah.
Because maybe like they're good and they are pursuing themselves, but just to kind of like orient ourselves in our relationship, to, like, questions to ask or something that they can do.
I think it starts with an awareness that nothing on the outside is ever going to make you happy. Start there, sir or ma'am. Like, whether it's your kids or whether it's your spouse, whether it's a different sex, like, nothing outside is ever going to make you happy and do it for you. And so you need to go on a critical mission to figure out what it is on the inside of you that's telling you something that's keeping you from being satisfied with nothing added to your life. The opportunity is for us to be happy about today, to be overwhelmed with empathy and gratitude, with nothing added and nothing taken away. And I say nothing taken away because I don't want all of my problems taken away. I don't want all of my stresses taken away. They're making me who I am. They are opportunities to make me who I am. And so,
more problems, more answers.
More problems, more answers, more influence, more resources. And so that being said, like, when a couple comes to me and they're having trouble, or somebody's drifting or thinking about going away, they have been slowly lured into believing that something from the outside can make them happy. Would you just stop it? Like,
Stop.
Nothing on the outside, and hopefully everything doesn't have to fall apart for you to understand this. Nothing on the outside is going to make you happy on the inside. Happiness on the outside comes from being happy and learning to be content and overwhelmed with empathy and gratitude on the inside. That's how you build a great relationship, when you don't need me to be happy, or you don't need that job or that level of income or that car or that recognition in order to be happy. That is an absolute recipe for disaster. If you need things from the outside to make you happy on the inside, you will attract happy and good things on the outside when you learn to get the inside lined up.
Ugh, how do you do that?
Well, I think it just comes down to, answering some foundational questions about life. Like, what makes a person valuable? What, again, what makes today a good day? And the answer is that I get to breathe and I have the opportunity to positively impact others. And that was the brilliance in Jesus' statement, which he was just a phenomenal teacher that understood humanity. And he just said, listen, if you want your life to count for something, there is more benefit in giving than receiving. And giving leads to receiving. But receiving doesn't necessarily lead to giving. When you can wake up each and every day and be overwhelmed with empathy and gratitude because you have an opportunity to positively impact others in light of taking on some tough stuff, or life not being where you want it to be, or the outside not being everything you want it to be, your insides will start to get whole. And the more good you see, the more good you will attract. And it will just be a giant snowball that works out for your good.
Yeah, that's good.
And for the people that have been conditioned through generational trauma to always watch out for and let their brain always tell them what's wrong versus what could be right. Congratulations, you're going to see a lot more wrong throughout your whole life, because what you set your mind on, you give energy to, and what you give energy to is what you grow. And so when you're a pessimist, or your childhood trauma has blocked you from being optimistic because it's an invitation for disappointment, you will do nothing but see more and more difficulty, because that's what you're giving your mind to. And what you give your mind to, you place your energy on, and what you place your energy on grows. And that's why our thoughts are so important. And I don't have to have everything right on the outside in order to start having the right thoughts on the inside. And when I get my thoughts right on the inside, I am giving power to new realities to form and grow toward my life.
That feels really helpful, because I can imagine that somebody listening might be really overwhelmed right now, just coming to the recognition of like, I am looking to other things to make me happy. My marriage sucks. I'm a miserable person, yada, yada, yada. And so that is taking control of your thoughts. Like, that's something that somebody can start doing today.
Yeah.
And so what a process that is, especially if it's not something that you've been doing for your whole life. And so what is a helpful way to like get the bad thoughts out rather than let them sit? And like, do you just speak them? Do you write them? Or do you just ignore them? Like, because they're there, right?
Yeah. Well, I would start with, again, that 20-mile march and a time of withdrawal each and every day. And then I would put a monitoring system on my thoughts, and I would journal out what my thoughts are. And then even if it's a scale of 1 to 100, give yourself a number. 100 is, this is pure positive. And then 0 or 1 is pure negative. And you need to figure out a way to get outside of yourself and actually give an unbiased, fair evaluation of what your thoughts actually are. It's tough. It's difficult to see ourselves for who we really are.
Yeah.
But you need to start with an evaluation of, are the majority of my thoughts positive? Am I typically optimistic? Or is my brain putting me in a position where I tend to be pessimistic because I view dreaming and believing the best to be another invitation for failure and disappointment, because I grew up in a place or with people that disappointed me.
Which would be an emotionship.
Which would be an emotionship, yeah. The association of dreaming and expecting the best with an invitation to disappointment being an invitation to disappointment is an emotionship that comes from being hurt and disappointed by authority or figureheads in the past.
I think too, and maybe this is probably another episode, but just an emotionship that we have with desire in talking about adultery and affairs. I think a lot of people were raised to feel shame around desire.
Yeah,
and
sure.
so they do things secretly. Like,
Sure.
oh, well, this desire isn't getting fulfilled in my marriage. I'm scared to ask for it. I'm scared to speak it. And so I'm going to go get it somewhere else that's hidden.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Episode 22, ladies and gentlemen. Until next time.